Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May God's peace, blessings, and mercy be upon you, all of you, and your families, and your friends, and everybody around you. I'd like to start off by thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for so many blessings in our life. You know, far too often we get so stuck on problems and difficulties. We forget to see the blessings that we really have. So alhamdulillah, our program, Knowledge to Action, it's about making help easy. It's about utilizing that opportunity to help somebody else so they may enjoy life, so they may also be able to start seeing the blessings in their life. I'd also like to thank our audience today. Jazakumullah khair, brothers, for coming. We've got a good multicultural representation. And today's topic is very befitting when it comes to multiculturalism. Our title is Think Different. We're focusing a lot on the attitudes and the thoughts that we have of other people. Today we'll be using the example of racism and how to challenge the thoughts that lead to racism. But we'll also be challenging other thoughts as well. I just want to take you back to last session. If you recall the story of Ahmad ibn Hanbal with the baker, and he got dragged out of the mosque, thrown into the street. And now I just want you to think for a second. If you were treated so terribly, what would be going on in your mind? What do you think about when somebody treats you bad or disrespects you? Next time you get an opportunity, inshallah it never happens, but the next time you have a bad experience with somebody, analyze your own thoughts and see what conclusions you start to draw from that experience. Sometimes we have a bad interaction with somebody from a specific race, and all of a sudden we label all of them, right? In Hajj, for example, the primary example of how multiculturalism really looks like, all equal. Sometimes people meet people from a different country for the first time ever, and they get this opportunity to get a positive opinion of this entire culture. Sometimes people take negative opinions. Those are the things that we're going to address as well today, inshallah. But back to the story of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. When he was dragged into the street, and the baker took him in, and remember from last episode, the baker remembered Allah every single night. All night he's remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Ahmad ibn Hanbal asks him, what, did you get any special gift from Allah because of this amazing practice that you're doing? And the man said, everything I want from Allah I get. Sort of like ourselves. We almost have everything that we want in life. A few things we don't have. So blessed. Except one thing. The baker says, An ara Ahmad ibn Hanbal. That I may see Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Didn't know it was him. That's where we ended off last session. Let's continue from there. What was Ahmad ibn Hanbal's response? Look at his attitude. Ahmad ibn Hanbal didn't focus on being dragged by some Robocop, but some security guard, into the street. He focused on his life purpose, his reason for existing. And he said, by Allah, I was dragged to your place so that you may have your dua come true. That's how he saw the experience. Because most often, my dear brothers and sisters, we're not affected by the event itself. We're really impacted by the perception of the event. And so it's very, very, very important to have that positive attitude all the time. It's going to lead to a different lifestyle. And so it's important to think different, which will lead to acting different. That's our change process today. There is a very well-known therapy. It's called cognitive behavioral therapy. right? The focus is that if you change the way you think, your emotions and your behavior will be impacted. Sounds simple enough, right? So if I walk into a room and I look at you for the first time like, oh, he don't like me. He doesn't like me. This guy, he's just got this, him and his big black beard, he's not smiling. He doesn't like me. Or I'm intimidated by him. Or I can't trust him. Whatever thought I have in my mind is going to impact how I feel and how I act. And we already covered how you, yourself, you can make sure that others have a positive impression of you with a smile. Right? And we wanted to focus especially if you got a big black beard because it accentuates the whiteness of your teeth. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. So, but right now we want to focus more on what is actually going on in our minds. If I say to you, brother, think different, are you going to be like, Jazakallah khair, that's excellent advice? You're going to be like, okay. How? How do you take the knowledge and convert it into action here? First, you got to understand that it's difficult. It's very hard. It's not easy to change the way you think because chances are you've been thinking that way since you were 6 years old or 5 years old or maybe even 2 years old. It depends on what it is you're talking about. For example, if it's impressions of male and female, well, your impressions of males and females began with your parents, mom and dad. So what happens when a child is born an orphan and has no father to be that figure for them? And we have these issues so often. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ being born an orphan is a reminder for us. There's a lot of people that need our help. Lots of people that need our help. So, some of these impressions they haven't formed, or if they've formed negative impressions. What about a young child who's abused his whole life? Or her whole life she's been treated like she's something less than. What are their impressions of others? This is what's all going on behind the scenes, right? So for our viewers at home, we can use this set as an example. You see me, but you don't see what's behind the scenes, the cameras, the lights, all of this stuff. There's so much going on in behind the scenes. If we can start understanding what's going on behind the scenes, we can start to address these issues a little more seriously. And today we want to talk about racism. How do we combat racism? By changing the way people think. How do we do it? There's a hadith. The Prophet said, Islam began as something strange and will once again return to something strange. What comes after? Tuba lil ghuraba, right? Glad tidings to the strangers, because it's good to be different. Could you imagine if we were all the same? We all looked the same, we talked the same, we had the same food, there was only 2 primary colors. Could you imagine how dull life would be? But it's not. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates us in different forms, and we speak different, and we look different. And this is a sign of Allah. This is a miracle. This is the beauty of life. Yet we want to do the opposite, and we want everybody to be like us. And if they're not like us, then they must be bad. That is a terrible, faulty schema. If you're not like me, you're not good. That has to be removed. This is the core schema of racism. Ana khayrun min. Who said that? Iblis. He's the first to say that word, right? There's where your racism began. Or speciesism, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. I'm better than him. Or I'm better than her. Later on, we're going to talk about, well, you got to challenge that. Why? What makes you better than another person? The color of your skin? Your parents? Things that you didn't even choose? Not logical. Whereas at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was so much multiculturalism around the Prophet. I mean, there's many examples, right? why don't you give us a few examples of some of the Sahaba?
Salman al-Farsi.
Salman al-Farsi, what an excellent example. Salman al-Farsi was a Persian. And Salman al-Farsi has an amazing history. He was born into nobility. And then he makes it to Al-Madinah in a poor state. Look into his life. You're going to see something very interesting. Let's get another example.
Bilal ibn Rabah.
Oh, Bilal, of course. This is, if you talk about multiculturalism and anti-racism in Islam, you have to speak about Bilal radiallahu anhu. There's so many stories. The first to give the adhan on top of the Kaaba. Imagine. Sometimes when you're on the third floor in Mecca, in Mecca, for most of you that have attended, and inshallah if you haven't, inshallah may Allah make it easy for you to do so. And you look at top of the Kaaba and you think, man, I'd love to be up there. Imagine the status of being on top of the Kaaba. So there's a massive story about that. Look into it. It's amazing, amazing. Let's give one more, inshallah.
We have Suhaib al-Rumi.
Suhaib al-Rumi. Of course, Suhaib the Roman. All right? So we've got all these examples. What did the Quraysh, the people, the pagans at the time, how did they view these Sahaba? How did they view multiculturalism? The same way that racists do. They said, if the Arabs follow Muhammad, then they're his people. But what are these guys doing here? So they're trying to establish that these groups should stay together and these groups should not. Right? Inshallah, we're going to get started with some cognitive distortions. All right? These, as a result of this way of thinking, it leads to specific distortions, specific errors that you can actually challenge. Because it's not easy to get at the core schema. Sometimes we will never know what it is. Unless we go through, as we spoke about in previous sessions, a process of cognitive behavioral modification. I mean, and some people call it brainwashing. Because you're literally washing away all that negative way of thinking and replacing it with a positive way of thinking. A way that contributes to your happiness, not adds to your stress. A way that brings you closer to people, not pushes you away from them. And a way that makes you have a good opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not one that disconnects you. Right? So when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about how we can start thinking different. We'll see you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah's peace, blessings, and mercy be upon you. And thanks for joining us. Thinking. What are all those ways of thinking that actually cause us problems? Why don't we have a small group discussion here in talking about thinking errors. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاجْتَنِبُوا كَثِيرًا مِنَ الظَّنِّ إِنَّ بَعْدَ الظَّنِّ إِثْمٌ. All right? Keep away most cases of suspicion. Right? Now we can stop on this verse and spend another 50 sessions on thinking and thinking different. Today we're just summarizing thinking different. So please do not think that this is the only thing that you need to do in order to think different. It takes years sometimes. All right? But anyways, keep away most cases of suspicion. Which suspicions are they? Why don't we talk a little bit about certain suspicions that are actually negative, that actually lead to su'dhan, negative opinions of others, that actually contribute to haram, maybe even backbiting, maybe even some serious social issues. Right? Anybody want to share?
No, you mentioned earlier to be prejudiced, yani.
Prejudice, right? Absolutely. To prejudge somebody, to assume that you know everything about them before even speaking to them. And we spoke in one of the sessions that everybody has a right to be judged appropriately, right? Not based on the color of the skin, not based on the way I talk, not based on the way I'm dressed, but to be judged as you are, right? Are there any others?
Yeah, I think it's like what Ibrahim said. Sometimes if you hear something bad about someone and you automatically like have that impression of that person, even though you haven't even asked them.
Imagine that. You don't even
Yeah.
challenge, right?
Yeah.
Somebody says, oh, be careful. See that dark guy in the middle with the green shirt? Yo, he's dangerous, right? And all of a sudden now you start acting what?
Mm.
Got to protect yourself. It's
Yeah.
only natural. And you know, subhanAllah, when you talk about backbiting, you know, it's not so light because it impacts the impression of people. The impression that you form of somebody else is going to impact the behavior, and so forth and so on, as we've discussed in previous sessions. Any others?
Also, basically judging someone purely on their past.
Purely on the past, right?
Yeah, someone had a past experience. He or she might have been involved in a particular act.
Absolutely.
And, you know, people develop and just judging someone purely on that.
Could you imagine if
Yeah.
you were judged on the worst thing you've ever done in your life? Could you imagine? If that was the only way people viewed you, would that be fair? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives all sins, right? All sins. We'll get into that in another session, but Allah doesn't judge based on only your past, right? Tawbah eliminates everything. Yeah, we humans, we're weak. We're not merciful. But it is a thinking error. You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. Okay. Now some people will tell you, well, hold on a second. The best judge of future behavior is past behavior. And I would say you're right. It is. So identify how that person changed. So when you talk about Umar ibn al-Khattab, pre-Islam, and you talk about him post-Islam, what happened in between? That's another story to talk about, right? Okay? So let me identify some of the stuff that we've derived here. One, all or nothing thinking. All or nothing thinking. So if you want to join in this exercise, think about it. Do you ever think in all or nothings? It's either or. It has to be this or that. There's no other alternative. A second one, overgeneralizing, right? You take something from a small sample and you generalize to a large sample. Anybody that knows anything about statistics knows that that's false. It's a false conclusion. You may get part of it right, but if it's too small of a sample, you can't really call anything on it. It's like saying 25% of human beings wear green shirts. Because, well, the sample is 4 of us and you're wearing a green shirt, right? Or 100% of people from Sweden are Muslim or converts because you're from Sweden and you've converted to Islam or reverted, whichever you choose, right? The statistic doesn't work. So that overgeneralization requires more evidence. The mental filter, right? The way that there's no way that you can interpret an event without it going through the negative experience filter. It's like you're saying, you look at a person who's got a bad past, that's the only thing that you look at, which is connected to disqualifying the positives. Ever find somebody who never talks about the positives? It's always negative. Everything's always negative. They disqualify any positive experiences, and not for any really good reason. It's arbitrary. Just, oh yeah, no. You talk about a brother, mashallah, this brother, he's done so much dawah, he does some good work. Yeah, but, haha, and disqualify all the positives. Jumping to conclusions, right? So something happens, and we've already kind of discussed this earlier on when we talked about the, when you take two concepts that are not related and you relate them, you know, he looks this way, therefore he must be this, prejudice, right? But there's two things that I'd like to remind everybody and our audience, inshallah ta'ala, about jumping to conclusions. One is mind reading. You think you know what's in the person's mind. Sometimes you have a good judgment of character, furasa. You can actually, you know what I mean? You can read nonverbals very, very, very well. You know, in psychology, it's important to understand, to learn what's going on in a person's mind by looking at their nonverbals, by engaging with them, and you know what? Simply asking sometimes and identifying patterns. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about understanding people, but mind reading. You're on a bus and you look at a person beside you, and obviously you say, yeah, he's thinking this of me. Well, how do you know? How can you possibly read somebody else's mind? Or fortune telling. Fortune telling is haram, right? You can't say this is going to happen. Oh, I'm going to show up and they're always going to start late. They're always going to, it's negative thinking. It's irrational. Even if 99% of the time bad things happen, think positive, because perhaps this time is the exception. And you got to believe that there's always exceptions. Right? And there's several other cognitive errors. And I know we're going through these a little quickly, but I'd like you, to reflect on each one of them for your own self. Another one is when everything's a catastrophe. Everything's a disaster. You can't see any possible hope in the future. That's it, my life is over because I got a 76% on my exam. Sometimes we get into that state of mind. There's nothing wrong with being anxious from time to time and worried and scared and all the emotions, even if they're negative. But it's got to be a temporary state. It cannot be a trait. Does that make sense? It's got to be temporary only, and we got to overcome these cognitive errors, or else they become part of us. Emotional reasoning. Have you ever felt something and said, I felt it, therefore it's true? I feel, therefore I am, right? I felt it, that means it exists. I felt that he didn't like me, therefore he didn't like me. The problem when our emotions start to dictate how we think is that our emotions are not governed by interconnected networks within the brain. Emotion is a totally different area. And it's important to distinguish between the two whenever you're talking to somebody or helping somebody. Is this how they think or is this how they feel? Because if somebody says, I feel hurt, you don't tell them, no, you shouldn't. That's invalidating their emotion. That's very hurtful. If somebody says, he intended to hurt me, that's when you said, no, he didn't. Two totally different worlds, right? Make sense? Okay. So that emotional reasoning is important to identify. As are the should statements. Everything should be this way. And if it's not this way, then it's wrong. That's what we call extremism. It's got to be this one way. There's no alternative opinions. Everybody else who said something on this specific topic is wrong except for me. The problem with that is it narrows the amount of knowledge that we have in Islam, right? It narrows the amount of the depth and the impact that Islam has had on the world. And so it's extremely important to be open-minded. Once again, we're not talking about your average debate when people talk about Islam. No, you guys should do this. That's not what we're talking. We're talking about ourselves here. That we need to explore and we need to learn more. We need to take as much knowledge as we can and turn it into action, starting with thinking differently. And we'll go back to our acronym, I, act. Identify the issue. Analyze it. Challenge it. And then try again. Because if you fail, big deal. Try again and keep trying. I'd like to end with a small story here. When we talk about thinking differently, there was a young boy. And this boy's just, sitting on these steps. If you walk around certain impoverished areas, you find the houses really close to each other. There's this little boy sitting on these steps. All of a sudden, a guy drives by in a brand new car and goes into the store. Picks up something, water, whatever it is. The boy's looking at the car and he's amazed. And so this young man comes out of the store and he's looking at this kid. He's like, yeah, kid likes my car. So he starts talking to the boy. He says, you like the car? He's like, that's a beautiful car. So he says, okay. He says, you want to ride? Kid's like, yeah, for sure. So kid hops into the car. They go for a spin. And so the owner of the car says, my older brother bought me this car. And so the little boy says, wow, I wish I was a brother like that. The guy driving thought, what? You know, he didn't pay too much attention to it because he thought, oh, maybe the kid just made a mistake. So they keep rolling. The boy says, can you go back to the spot where you picked me up from, please? I need to do something really important. So he says, yeah, okay. So he rolls around. They come by the, back to the steps. The little boy runs inside the house, comes out with a crippled young boy, his little brother. And he places him on the steps. And he says, look, you see? It's exactly the car I was talking to you about. And his brother bought it for his little brother, just like I'm going to buy you your car. I wish I was a brother like that, rather than I wish I had a brother like that. May Allah make us people who give and help others for His sake, and that keep giving and keep helping and thinking positively. See you next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.